And without further ado, I'm going to launch straight into sort of the human side of cybersecurity and what the current situation is. So what we have in the market at the moment is things are really shifting and changing. And one of the things that, from a statistical point of view, that it's argued is that our own actions and behaviours are accountable for 95% of information security breaches. So there's that really common misconception that cybersecurity is really all technical, and it's a technical problem. And yes, we'll go on to talk about the technical controls you can put in place, but ultimately the biggest risk comes down to the human element and the human side of things. And of those human errors, human breaches, insider threat accounts for 66% of that, so which is, you know, two huge statistics. And when we're talking insider threat, we're talking your employees, but we're also talking about other individuals that might have access to your systems, to your data. So that might be your suppliers, potentially your customers on your platforms, but also insider threat. I sort of came up with an example earlier in the week when I was talking about, for me, insider threat this week has been my kids. I'm in the front of a car and all of a sudden I get the kids arguing in the background because they've managed to work out mum's password because they've been watching me all week during the half-term holiday and have managed to hack in and add their thumbprint, they're telling me. So you can imagine instant horror. But what I didn't do was think about, okay, what does that equate to in risk? And what that equated to is I just then angrily went onto my phone, changed my password, and didn't think about the consequences of being stuck in the middle of nowhere with no Wi-Fi signal. So my iPhone wasn't being backed up. I could not remember the password that I changed it to for love nor money. It was that secure in the heat of the moment. And there was no way that I could reset my phone because my data was absolutely maxed out. So 4 hours wasted on the phone to Apple. Long and short of it, I then just did a lost phone and reset, which is great if you then didn't have a virtual SIM, which meant that you then had to go and find an e-store in a location you didn't know and wait 5.5, 6 hours. So I lost in terms of productivity quite a lot. So that was my insider threat that particular day. Not great, because I should be backing up. I shouldn't be sharing my password. So, let that be a lesson to all of you, that actually think about what is the level of threat, what is that insider risk, before you take gut decisions to quickly change things in an instant. But what we do know is that of this 95% and this 66% of insider threats is that people can be the strongest defense without a shadow of a doubt from information and cybersecurity breaches. And in this real kind of changing current climate, it's really important that we embrace the people.
Hi, Melanie.
Good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, dynamite, thanks.
Could you put yourself up? It's okay, Steve, I can mute you, don't worry. So again, if anybody isn't muted, if I can ask that you mute yourselves, unless you have a question to raise. So we can really use ourselves and the people within our organisation as that frontline defenders, as that great source of strength, and that's what I'm briefly going to cover with you today. So what's happening in the world as we know it now? The environment is changing, and behaviours that is spelt wrong is also changing. So what we have is we've got this shift from what is a very controlled work environment to us working from home. And yes, there's the physical controls that have changed, and I'll go on to those, and the technical side, but also our behaviour changes and how we feel, and we feel far more comfortable in our home environment. So potentially where we would have been a little bit more alert and a little bit more identifying risks and potential risks and the threat of risks, we tend to feel a little bit more comfortable in our home environment. So the way that we're looking at things, and as a rule, cybersecurity criminals, cyber criminals exploit our emotions. And what we've seen in recent news is the increase in number of attacks through phishing and social engineering around COVID, because this is something that's really emotional to us, of which is going to get a reaction and response. Obviously, the increase at the moment, you'll see the next shift of scams coming through, looking at gift card fraud, for example. And again, it's because what we're trying to do is we can't get out to the shops, we can't buy, so can we buy gift cards online? And we're all shifting to that. So, we've got these sort of really shifting behaviours that change, but a lot of them powered by emotions. And I think this is something that's really powerful, that from a technical point of view isn't ever covered, as to what risks are we because of what we're powered by being our emotions. So in terms of the environment and what is changing, we have a bit of this scenario. We've got a load of people working from home and computer says no. Where we used to have somebody within the office environment that if computer said, no, you can't do it, there'd be that certain sense check where you'd look, can I really do it? Should I really be doing this? Whereas actually there's nobody looking over your shoulder. There's nobody watching you. And given a little bit of time and a little bit of that word that I can't say, where you go and do something off your own back. If anybody else wants to step in, please do. Using your own initiative, you can go in and change your controls and your settings, and we're a little bit more risky. We're also using a lot more of our own personal devices as well. So this kind of computer says no isn't necessarily a consistent thing that's happening at the moment. We're kind of bypassing that. There are three main fundamental things that has happened as an impact of COVID, and this is why the human side and insider risk has been predicted as being one of the main focuses for information security professionals and organisations by the analysts for next year. And that's because we've got this distributed workforce who are now off the network or outside of the network, so they've not got to go through the same controls to get into the system. In some organisations that have really good technical controls tend to be the larger organisations than the small ones. Then there may be things like VPNs, virtual private networks, that are put in place, but actually that slows down potentially already slow internet within organisations, so people are bypassing that. You've got that reduced visibility, so where somebody might be looking over your shoulder and seeing what you're doing, or your colleague checking, well, why are you really sending that file that way? You've not got that same level of visibility. And as I mentioned also, previously, greater autonomy. We think we can fix this, we can find a solution. So this distributed workforce is a real problem for organisations and businesses, and it's only expected to get far worse. Increase of collaboration tools. Collaboration tools, Slack, Teams, Google Drive, all these things are brilliant. What it's meaning is actually we're probably far more efficient now than we ever were, because we can all get on there, share the documents. But what that means is these documents are so much easier to access as well, which means they're so much easier to access, so much easier to share. So the visibility that we had and control over our company information has also minimized. And unless we find the technical controls in place, then there's no means to actually to be able to see where the flow of information is happening, particularly within small organizations that have less technical controls. So all this increased sharing and collaboration tools are happening, which is great, because we want to share, we want to get the best out of our teams. And to be fair, all these breaches and things that happen don't particularly happen because of malicious intent. It happens because people wanting to do their job do it far quicker and far faster, and therefore circumnavigating those controls. The other element that's happening is this cultural shift, and it's potentially blamed on the generation X and Y, or Y and Z as it is, and we don't have the same basically, I suppose, commitment to an organisation that historically that we had. So where we used to have employees in organisations that used to be there for a long time, some of the new generations coming in will typically only stay with an organisation for career progression purposes for about 3 years. So therefore they're moving, and when they're moving, they're thinking about their career enhancements and where it's going. And they also have this false entitlement that actually that things that they create and do, they're proud of and they're theirs. And in a lot of organisations, people don't set out and explain exactly what controls should be in place, so or what the boundaries are. So, for example, you have developers that are creating software, and they're really proud of that software, so they want to take it with them. But it's making sure that actually that software that you've developed and you've created, yes, you've built, but it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the organisation. The sales database that you've created as a salesperson, yeah, you've made some great contacts on LinkedIn. You've basically gone out there and you've built the business for us, but they're not your contacts to then take to the next organisation. And these are all things that are happening a lot more quicker. Our connections that we have via social media, so many more of them. So it's just being mindful of all these things and this shift in behaviours that's putting our organisations increasingly at risk. But the good news about all this is, again, people powered by their emotions, they generally want to do a good job, and they're not necessarily doing any of this out of malicious intent. So it's thinking about how we sort of embrace this and encourage people to actually get recognition for their work, but also understand where the boundaries lie. And that's deepened in really good and positive communications. The other thing, just on that cultural shift, is uncertainty and doubt, is that these are really difficult times. They're really challenging times, and we don't know, and we can't necessarily see the financial pressures or the family pressures that an individual might be under, that we potentially could see the visibility of when we've got a shared office environment. So it's really important that there's an understanding as to what might be the underlying issues behind what might make somebody a fraudulent employee who tries to take money from the business, or make somebody, as say, a begrudging employee, because they've done some work, but they've not had the same level of recognition for the work that they've done. All these sort of things play a real important part in cybersecurity, which is what makes our data a little bit more vulnerable. To be able to shift and change a culture, there is sort of 5 key things to be thinking of, and these will be my sort of top areas to think about how you focus and concentrate cyber activities. And it's about creating the right environment, so making sure that it's supportive, transparent, and encouraging and inclusive. Again, as I say, by giving people the recognition and the space to talk about their achievements and recognizing those is really, really important. Really good communications, making sure that you're keeping things as simple as possible, stripping of anything technical jargon. Right now, it's not necessary from a cybersecurity point of view to over jargonize it. Just talk about the actions that you want people to do slightly differently. Make sure that you're giving information in a format that is engaging. More than anything, I think one of the things is we have information overload. So think about what are the highest level risks to you, and really focus on delivering that message in a way that's really engaging. The reason we are so susceptible to risk is because we have all these inherent bad habits, these habits of doing things a particular way, and that's why it's quite difficult to change. So the problems we have around password management and people writing down passwords or using the same password is because they've done them since, for as long as we can possibly remember, and therefore shifting and changing those behaviors is really difficult. But anything is possible. Any of you that have tried a sport or tried to do anything in lockdown, it's about the repetition and doing it again. So think about, from an organizational point of view, what are your biggest risks when it comes to those 3 areas around collaboration tools, around information sharing, around passwords. What is it that's the biggest risk to you? What is likely to happen to your business as a result of this distributed workforce that's going to cause a potential cybersecurity breach or risk? And then looking at this collaboration in the sense that get people to think about the shared responsibility, and that everyone within the organization is responsible for cybersecurity. As I say, 95% cybersecurity breaches are a result of the behaviors and habits that we have, of which 66% of people who have direct access to your systems, who are trusted individuals. So working with them, being transparent with them, and talking with them about what you're trying to implement and how is really, really, really fundamental. There's lots that I've covered in that session, and say I'm conscious that we've got 3 sections to get through and some Q&A. So my final point I would sort of touch on and leave on is changing cultures is the small changes that make a big difference. Do one thing and do it really, really well, and good behavior breeds and make it habit. So my suggestion would be, think of the 5 main controls, some of which I think James is going to touch on, which is around passwords, 2-factor authentication, and then we've got backing up of information, viruses, all covered in the NCSC top 5. Do one, concentrate it, communicate it, and work out how you're going to do it well, and then move on. How's that for a bit of a lineup for you, James? I'll hand over to you now, if that's okay.